Artificial intelligence will be a central topic at this week's G7 ministers meeting in Montreal. Let's get more from Stephen Karan, Vice President, AI Data and Analytics at Capgemini Canada. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So does Canada need to collaborate with allies? And if so, on what fronts? I mean, I guess defense would be an obvious one.
You know what? The need to collaborate with our allies on all things artificial intelligence is growing more and more acute by each day. You know, the speed of innovation that's happening in this space is, simply put, just too difficult for any one single country, maybe perhaps outside of the US and maybe China, to really wrap their arms around fully in order to truly grasp like the full maximum benefit for businesses, for citizens, across each nation. So I think the need to collaborate grows more and more acute every day. Absolutely, there are some specific areas or use cases where that need is perhaps most emergent, which is certainly touched on, one being defense. I think there's also an opportunity in healthcare. And surprisingly, there are some key verticals, including industry verticals such as energy, utilities, that are very important to Canada, where there really isn't a standard in terms of artificial intelligence, both in terms of applicability, but also in terms of the things that are perhaps a little bit boring around interoperability, where I think there is an opportunity for Canada to advocate for some close collaboration and some perhaps parallel investments to really make sure that this technology is of most use for the industries that are most critical to our economy.
What about finance?
Finance is one where we've seen across the globe different countries taking different approaches to how artificial intelligence should be applied within the finance sector. I think it is an area of potential opportunity, but I do feel that there are some specific areas, specific countries that already maybe have a head start on us. Specifically, there's areas within Europe that are really focused on how do you protect financial data and guard financial data with the use of AI with the right guardrails. And that is clearly a different position than perhaps the US will be taking as it relates to AI regulation. So that needle may be a little bit more difficult for Canada to thread versus other industries, as I mentioned, energy, utilities, even manufacturing, where I think there's more of an opportunity to collaborate and more of a willingness to collaborate as well.
Okay, so we're talking about the need to work together. That being said, we hear a lot of talk about the need for sovereignty in AI. Oh, yeah. So what does that look like?
You know what? It seems on the surface that these things are mutually exclusive, right? How can you have the need for collaboration while each country, Canada, the US, UK, Germany, France, all sort of investing in terms of sovereign AI infrastructure? And really, when you look at the two, they are sort of different, but they're not in conflict with another. I think what we're clearly seeing from the multinational AI businesses and AI enablers. So think, for example, the large hyperscaler companies that have made investments on AI infrastructure. Those investments are not only happening in the US, they're actually happening globally. Germany, for example, has done a great job of attracting private partnership through some of the major hyperscalers and NVIDIA into their AI ecosystem. The UK and France have done the same thing as well. And I think this is where, on the Canadian side, we can learn from our allies and our colleagues around what they've done to attract that investment and to see if we can boost our private sector investments that we're attracting in this country, because we are slightly behind some of our allies in that department.
Okay, so let's talk about regulation, because I'm wondering if countries or allies even agree on the need to regulate AI.
You know what? That's a very astute question. And the short answer is there is a bit of a difference of opinion right now in terms of how AI should be regulated. I think on one end of the spectrum, you may have countries like such as the US, which are very much focused on less regulation right now and more on private sector investment and private sector partnerships. And then you have some clear stakes in the ground some of our European allies have made related to the AI regulation. And I think this is actually where there's an opportunity for Canada to act as a bit of a bridge. We're somewhere in the middle right now where we're not actually as heavily regulated in terms of artificial intelligence with our European allies, and perhaps not as far on the other end of the spectrum as the US. So I think in terms of regulation, let's focus on the areas that are going to be critical to us. So you touched on defense. If we can have a set of standards around the applicability of AI in defense industries, including our private sector defense industries, that would be a fantastic boon in terms of just accelerating the adoption in a safe and pragmatic way. And also, I think there's similar opportunities to establish those standards in healthcare, as we talked about, and again, in the energy resources sector as well. And perhaps that is an area where Canada can take the lead position in terms of advocacy.
Okay, so now the more difficult question, Steve, because if other countries don't regulate in the same way, they have looser restrictions or looser regulations, what will be the risk then to us?
You know what? It's an interesting question, but I actually don't think a focus on regulation prohibits investments. So the great example of that right now is actually France and Germany, both within the European Union, both that are very much covered by the GDPR extensions around extensions into AI usage and AI applicability. But both of those countries have done a tremendous job in terms of attracting private sector partnerships and private sector funding into growing their local AI ecosystems. Germany, for example, is north of 5 billion euros right now in terms of private sector investments. I think France is probably somewhere closer to now about 30 million euros in terms of private sector investments. So I do believe you can actually have a bit of a hybrid approach in terms of, yes, making sure that this technology is regulated in the right way with the right standards for our critical industries like healthcare, financial services as well, but also at the same time, still maintaining an attractive position for multinational organizations that are looking to invest in this space. And one of the things that we have going for us, Marella, is that we absolutely have the right talent in this country to take advantage of that investment, to commercialize those investments, to do further research. And I would love to see some investments targeted towards that area specifically.
Okay, it's one we will have to watch. Steve, appreciate you joining us. Stephen, Vice President of AI Data and Analytics, Capgemini Canada.